The bouncer said my military ID was fake until the bar owner saw the name and started crying. The bar was called Fallback. I'd driven 3 hours to get here, following an address I'd found in my brother's belongings after the funeral. Austin had been dead for 6 months, and I was still finding pieces of his life I didn't understand. This place was one of them. A matchbook with the name scrawled on the back in his handwriting, tucked inside a book about combat trauma he'd never mentioned reading. I needed to know why this place mattered to him. The parking lot was mostly empty on this Wednesday evening, just a few motorcycles and beat-up trucks scattered across the cracked asphalt. I locked my car and walked toward the entrance, my brother's dog tags hanging around my neck under my shirt, where I'd worn them every day since the funeral. The bouncer was massive, 6'5" easily, with arms like tree trunks and a beard that covered half his face. He sat on a stool by the door, scrolling through his phone. When I approached, he looked up and sized me up in that way security does. I pulled out my military ID card, the one that identified me as Sergeant Kyle Osman, United States Marine Corps, currently on authorized leave. He took it and held it up to the light, squinting at the photo and then at my face. Then his expression changed, hardening into something suspicious. "This is fake," he said flatly, handing the card back to me. I stared at him, confused. It wasn't fake. It was a legitimate military ID issued by the Department of Defense with all the proper security features. I told him it was real, and he could verify it if he needed to. He shook his head and crossed his arms. He said he'd seen enough fake IDs to know one when he saw it, and mine was definitely fake. The photo looked photoshopped, and the card felt wrong. He told me to leave before he called the cops for fraud and impersonating a service member. My face got hot with anger. A few people had stopped outside to watch. I insisted again that my ID was real, that I was actually in the Marines, that this was absurd. The bouncer stood up to his full height, towering over me, and said if I didn't leave immediately, he'd physically remove me from the property. I was about to argue more when the front door opened and a man stepped out, probably in his early 50s with gray hair and weathered skin. He wore jeans and a faded military t-shirt and moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had taken damage. He asked what the problem was, and the bouncer explained that I was trying to use a fake military ID to get in. The older man asked to see the ID, and the bouncer handed it over. The man held the card under the exterior light and read it carefully. Then he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite parse, something between confusion and recognition. He asked my name, and I told him Kyle Osman. He went very still, his eyes locked on my face. Then he asked if I was related to Austin Osman. The sound of my brother's name from a stranger's mouth hit me like a physical blow. I nodded and said Austin was my brother, that he died 6 months ago. The man's face crumpled, his eyes filling with tears that he didn't bother to hide. He made a sound that was half sob, half exhale, and leaned against the doorframe like his legs wouldn't hold him. The bouncer looked alarmed, but the man waved him off. He wiped his eyes and told the bouncer that my ID was real, and I was welcome here any time, that in fact, I should never have to pay for a drink in this establishment ever again. The bouncer started to protest, but the man cut him off sharply, saying he owned this bar and his word was final. Then he looked at me with such raw grief in his expression that I felt my own eyes start to burn. He introduced himself as Derek Holloway and asked if I'd come inside so he could talk to me about Austin. I followed him into the dim interior of Fallback, my heart pounding with questions I didn't know how to ask. Inside, the bar was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood, sticky floors, a long bar with mismatched stools, pool table in the back, and walls covered in military memorabilia. Photos of service members in various uniforms, unit patches, challenge coins behind glass, a folded flag and a case above the bar. Derek led me to a booth in the corner, away from the handful of other patrons. He went behind the bar and poured 2 whiskeys, neat, and brought them back. He set one in front of me and raised his own glass in a silent toast before downing it in one swallow. I sipped mine, the burn familiar from the nights after Austin's funeral when I tried to drink away the confusion and guilt. Derek sat across from me and studied my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. He said I looked like Austin, same dark eyes and sharp features, same way of holding tension in my shoulders. Derek asked how Austin died and I gave him the official story, suicide. Austin had hanged himself in his apartment 3 days before anyone found him. No note, no warning signs that anyone noticed, just gone. The therapist at the VA had talked about delayed combat trauma and adjustment disorders. My parents had accepted that explanation because it was easier than questioning it, but I'd never believed it. Austin had been doing well. He'd been going to school, working part-time, seeing friends. He'd seemed happier in the months before his death than he had in years. Something about the suicide narrative didn't fit. Derek listened to my explanation, and when I finished, he said something that made my blood run cold. Austin didn't kill himself. Austin was murdered, and I know who did it. Full story is linked below or on my channel.